Our presenters today are Lori Baker and Amy Clark. Lori Baker is a highly respected supported housing and homeless service expert. Hopefully many of you, Lori spoke a couple years ago at our Transition Summit. A lot of you may know her from her years serving on the statewide Housing and Employment First Coordinator for the Secretary of Illinois Department of Human Services. Since October 2018, she is now the President and CEO of the Association for Individual Development, AID. AID has served individuals with developmental, intellectual, physical, and mental health challenges, those who have suffered a trauma, and those at risk. Serving over 5,500 children and adults, AID provides life-enriching services that promote the highest level of independence and community immersion. Among the things they do, they have autism programs, they have supportive housing, they have in-home supports, developmental and vocational training, job placement. They kind of run the gamut. It's very impressive, all the things that AID does. They also support over 600 individuals living in their own apartments and more than 200 in CILAs, community integrated living arrangements, throughout the Fox Valley area. We have to nudge you this way a little bit, Lori.
Talk to my board about that.
Okay, we will. Amy Clark is the mother to 3 young adults, 2 of them with Angelman syndrome, which is a neurological disorder affecting the 15th chromosome. Amy has fought tirelessly for years to help her boys reach their full potential as individuals and to help them make their dreams of an adult life a reality. The family all currently reside in Batavia, although in different houses, which you'll hear about today. Speaking off of what Amy told me, we love telling parent stories. We love embracing families who are working hard to build partnerships. They're putting in the work, because it is work. No one's going to do it for you. And Amy's a great example of somebody who was driven to say, you know, this is what my boys need, and I'm going to find a way to get it done. So thank you, Amy, for coming. So please help me welcome Lori Baker and Amy Clark.
Well, I'm Amy Clark, and I just want to say I'm really honored to be here with you all and just so grateful for this community, because if it weren't for parents and our whole community of parents, you know, none of us would be alive to tell about it, I think. So I just feel honored and grateful that I have the rest of you to gain information from, and we can do this together. So I do have 2 boys with Angelman syndrome. They have pretty severe needs. They're affected by their fine motor, gross motor, cognitive abilities, complete lack of speech. They have sensory issues, behavior issues, seizures. So they're pretty profoundly disabled. For years, I had gone to our Day One network, who was our provider at the time, and asked them for respite care. And as you know, time and time again, you hear, we have nothing, we have nothing, we have nothing. Eventually, I ended up at a point where, as a single mom, I had 1 kid in the hospital for 5 days having grand mal seizures, and I had no idea what I was going to do with my oldest son. And it posed a tremendous problem. And we did end up making it work. However, on the way back from the hospital, literally on the way back, I thought I have got to just stop into that Day One network office because I'd been making my annual phone calls, but as I said, that only got me so far, which was nowhere. And so I had my son with me, and we were on our way back home from the hospital, and there was a Day One network office, and I just decided to pull in and say, you know, I'm desperate. I can't do this anymore. There's got to be something else out there. And at that point, when they heard my story, they ended up providing respite care through the home-based waiver. So that's when we started receiving that. At that meeting, they asked me if I would be open to residential for either one of my boys or both of them. And of course, I said yes, that I would like to be on the PUNS list for housing and get that ball rolling if it was possible. It was going to be about 2 more years later after that event happened that my oldest son, Brandon's name was drawn off the PUNS list, and I found out that we qualified for residential housing. So that was pretty exciting and scary all at the same time. But that just really started the ball rolling because then you have a time clock where you have to figure it out in a certain amount of time. I had spent years going to different seminars and conferences to try to figure out how the system works and how to navigate this. And I guess kind of a side note to the story as well, I had been renting out a home that wasn't too far from where I lived when our family decided to move into a larger house. So we weren't able to sell our first home because of the market being so bad, and I just decided, okay, we're going to rent that out and kind of sit on it because it was a perfect home for my boys once they finally reached that age where they would be living on their own with a care provider. So never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that it would happen as soon as it did for them, but needless to say, that house had been sitting there, and I was hoping that that could be utilized at some point in time. So this actually launched me into just trying to do all the math and figure out, well, how could I get him into that house with the funding through the state? And no matter how much I added up funding, there was no way that I was going to be able to do that on my own and afford to do that and have all the supports in place that either one of the boys needed to do that on my own. So once we had our name drawn off the punds list, we ended up sending our packets out to multiple different providers. Now you need to find a day program provider that also cooperates with residential services. So there really has to be an opening in both places. And when we were sending all of our packets out, it seemed like no one was accepting him, or there would be an opening in day programming, but there would be nothing open in residential. And all these places were so far from where I lived, there was no way that we could accept a day program, especially with him. He was going to be aging out of the system, so he was going to be 22 in the next couple years, and I just knew we weren't going to be able to travel far. But we ended up sending our packet to AID, which was pretty close by where we live. It's probably 5 to 10 minutes from our house. And I received information that they didn't have any openings there either. So from what I understand, our packet was sent to them a couple different times. And in the course of that time, after we sent the first packet and the boys got denied, we sent a second packet offering, on the cover sheet, we had offered this rental home as a solution for residential placement. So, along with Brandon came a possible house that they could put other young adults in as well for housing. And unfortunately, we were denied again and said, we can't do this, and we don't have openings. So at any rate, we had sent out 24 packets, and every time got denied. Through our social worker, I think it was hard to tell exactly what the follow-up was, because then in the course of all of this, I ended up calling different places and checking up on our packets, and either packets didn't come across their desk or they didn't understand exactly what was needed, because your child looks one way on paper and presents another way in person. So that's when, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with Laura Fine, if we're all associated with NSSEO, but she really encouraged me to just keep going and keep pursuing AID. And she said, Amy, you really just need to call a meeting with them and get together and, present exactly what you have and what you're looking for. So fortunately for her, for me, she gave me the confidence that I needed to go in, make another phone call, meet with Lori, who graciously agreed to meet with me as a parent. And I was able to go into that meeting, explain Brandon's needs, explain what we had, and I knew I had one shot, so I went in with all the information about the home that we had, exactly what the cost of living would be, what all the utilities were, what the room sizes were, what the house looked like, and we began to troubleshoot with how we could make that work and exactly what was available. So Let's see. Sorry, I think I'm like out of order. But, so I think, I don't know. In sum, I think persistence is the key. We have to be flexible as well. Once AID did agree to partner with us and go through and look at the house, then it became just a whole process of negotiating exactly what that was going to look like and how they were going to find the staff to cover care for the boys. Both of my sons are not in the home together at this time. My oldest son, Brandon, lives with his best friend, Billy, and they're going to be having another young adult move in the next few months. But that's where we're working towards, so.
So when Amy originally was reaching out to AID, it was before I became the president and CEO. And we get hundreds of packets all the time for people searching for potential services. And, you know, they can be from a variety of areas inside and outside of your service area, because that's kind of how it goes. You send out dozens of packets and see what might be nibbled on by different providers. Before I started at AID in the fall of 2018, several years before, our board had made a decision not to purchase any new properties because, frankly, we lose our shirt on Scylla service, and real estate is really high. It's a challenge to find some place that meets the needs of people, that is, you know, a ranch or, you know, one level that you can make accessible at all. And frankly, when they come on the market, they're like gone, like, you know, and that are affordable, you know, that everyone is looking for in the world, right? They disappear really quickly. So, you know, our board had made that decision, but, and there is a risk for all, I'm being totally honest with everyone, there's a risk from a provider perspective and working with folks that have really intensive needs because of our OIG system, our DSP shortage, the potential for harm to staff or the resident of Scylla. You know, we all have seen things in the paper about situations that, you know, perhaps seem worse sometimes than they really are, because, you know, somehow we think that no bad thing ever happens to anyone with a disability that happens to people without disabilities, right? I mean, the illusion of safety in our world is an illusion, right? Because we can walk into Target or Walmart, right, and not live. We can't ensure the safety of our children at their public schools. So we all, you know, kind of have this illusion that we are 100% safe all the time, and we have that expectation even more for people with a disability that are receiving services from providers. I'm not talking about people that intentionally harm or do bad things to people. I'm talking about, you know, somebody, you know, getting hit by a car, a van that you're riding in being hit by someone else or bumping into something. I mean, you know, this is the world. They're called accidents for a reason. But our system doesn't really take that into account. So it means that most providers are really reluctant to look at a package like Amy is talking about that comes to us for folks that have very high needs and that could have the capability of throwing or hitting or doing other behaviors that, you know, are unsafe for the staff, but has actually worked out really well so far, knock on wood. You know, and then there's also the challenges when you put in a packet with the Division of Developmental Disabilities. I think once we finally came to a decision that we were going to work with Amy and try to, you know, figure out how to make this homework and how many residents would live there and what supports need they had. I know that we submitted the packet initially to the Division of Developmental Disabilities, and they came back and said, here's how much money and services we're going to give you. And we were like, no, that's not enough, and had to continue to negotiate with them back and forth. So it is a process. It's not going to be anything that's, you know, super quick or fast. I'm trying to think, when did we initially meet?
Well, it was in the spring,
Yeah.
winter.
Yeah, so we initially met like probably late winter in 2019, right? And took months to work through agreements and packets and back and forth. Our staff went to trainings. We went to special trainings and conferences on Angelman syndrome and ways to work with folks successfully so that we could be as prepared as possible to hire the right people and to have the right interventions and supports that were needed. We had lots of discussions. It helped us to have a parent come and say, we have a property that we're willing to lease that we think would be a good fit, because again, my board has told us we're not allowed to go buy anything. So that really helped. Just a lot of ongoing feedback back and forth, lots of meetings, building the relationship between Amy and her family and our staff, as well as the ISC and the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So it was ongoing process. Brandon started at Keeler Center, which is our day services program for people with really high support needs, whether that be medical, physical, behavioral, or a combination of the three. And Billy was already attending there, I think, when Brandon started, and they were best friends and have been best friends for
a long
time. So, that was good, and it was a good start at Keeler. And then as we began to do these visits to the house, so they would go and have lunch at the house from Keeler Center, Billy and Brandon, with some staff. And then they come back to day program and finish up and go home. Then they would go and visit after day program was over, go home to their potential house, stay there until dinner time, come home.
It's a very gradual transition process.
Yeah, so it was a really gradual transition process. Then they started going and staying after a day program until it was bedtime, and then they'd go back to their parental homes for bedtime. Then they started staying all week long, overnight and through the week, and then still going home on the weekends, because we were still struggling to find all the staff that we needed and have trained to be able to stay for 24/7, 365. And then finally they were able to be fully living in the home and be there 24/7, except for when they go to day programs. And so far it has been really good. I mean, I think better than any of us expected. And I'll let you talk to that for a minute if you want.
Well, I think too what's important to know is the process did take a lot longer than we anticipated, because we did have to work together for filing for additional funding that's above and beyond what the typical special needs individual needs, because Brandon's needs were so tremendously high because of his behaviors, his aggression, his sensory issues when he is in the community can be overwhelming. He does hit, he throws, he can pull hair, get very upset. And so it was nice to have that gradual transition, not just for Brandon's sake, but for staff's sake, to be able to get used to the boys and figure out what works, what doesn't work. And at this point, actually, we're at Monday through, or they go over there Sunday night, and then they come back to my house on Friday night. So, and we're trying to work that out until they have additional staff hired for the weekends that we feel like is a really good fit. So it's not a process that as parents, the other mother and I have ever pushed, you have to have them in, and you have to have them in 7 days a week. I think we've worked really well as a team, finding out what not only works for our kids, but what works for staff as a whole. And it's been it really has been an amazing process, because I feel like the staff through AID has been absolutely amazing. And just the way that we've worked things on a more personal level really has felt like they're just an extension of our family. And I would never have imagined that it would work as well as it has. So kudos to AID. Yeah.
So, part of the thing that we wanted to talk about today was, as a family, what you can do, because I don't know about you, but I don't own any property that I could bring to the table. But what other things might you have a connection to that you could talk to a provider about? I mean, do you have fundraising connections? Do you have other families that could partner together to do something that you're connected to? Do you know a landlord in the community that would be interested in renting and helping develop a specialized property for a set of residents, right? Do you have ideas about ways that you could do it? I mean, we've all heard all these stories, from families. I mean, there's a story in the paper about the family who lived in a house. They built on in the back like what used to be called the mother-in-law suite, right? And they moved into the mother-in-law suite, and the Scylla is in the family home that is attached in the front and is run just like it. There are people that know a landlord that owns a building that might be interested in renting apartments. One of the things that we do at AID is we work really closely with the statewide referral network, Section 811 waiting list, public housing authorities to get access to affordable housing for people, and develop a Scylla or an iScylla in multiple locations in that way. So, for example, we have an 8-person Scylla that is in 4 apartments in an apartment building. There are, 3 2-bedrooms and 1 3-bedroom, and those 2 bedrooms are 2 roommates, and then the 3-bedroom is 2 roommates and the staff, and that's like kind of the staff apartment where people can come. They usually will have a congregate meal in the evening, can work on things together, or can do things in their own apartments, and that is a 24-hour Scylla, and we have 24-hour staff there. We also have some folks that get intermittent Scylla services in that same building that have their own apartment. We just moved we had a fire in a Scylla property in the Elgin area right before I started at AID, and thank goodness it was like in the dishwasher whenever they turned on the dishwasher and left for the day, everyone. So it didn't harm any people, but it harmed the property. And so those women had probably lived together 30 plus years, and they were in their 60s and 70s. So it was really traumatic for them to not be at their home. But as we looked at the home and were repairing it, it was very clear that it wasn't meeting their needs as they were aging, because there were stairs, there were not wide enough doorways if they needed to use any transportation, or not transportation, any walking or moving assistance at all that they needed. If they needed to use a walker or a chair, there really wasn't room for it. So we made the decision that we were going to sell that home, and these young ladies were on a waiting list for statewide referral network units, and just moved into two brand new apartments in a senior complex in West ND, and are thrilled. I mean, they have two bedrooms, so that are close to each other. So they have two roommates. They're in a property that also offers other services to people that are seniors, so they'll be able to access those services and be around their peers who are people without disabilities that are aging, as well as their roommates that do have disabilities that they've lived with for a long time. And they are so excited. The pictures of them standing in their brand new apartment that no one has ever lived in, these are brand new from the, built from the ground up, is really exciting. And you would think that that wouldn't be possible with folks that have lived in a traditional Scylla system for a long time, but there are ways to make the pieces work depending upon how flexible you are, how creative you are, and your ability to get on a lot of lists and wait for a lot of connections because it potentially can take, a variety of time. You got to be open to that creativity. I think that, part of what Amy did, I know she told me when we were planning for this, and, I'll speak for you a little bit, but you can push me out of the way if you want. But, she was like at the end of a rope and was like, nobody's, nobody's what's going to happen. Nothing is working. Nothing's going to happen. And, Laura Fine from NSSEO said, you need to call Lori Baker. She said, I've talked to AID. They've said no. She's like, no, you should try it. And so she persisted and, sent an email, and we set up a meeting and, talked about it. I think you have to be persistent. You don't realize the number of outreaches we get in our intake line that are people just learning, like you guys, so it's hard to know the seriousness of people, if they really are interested in your community, if, what is happening, should you meet with them, and, I think you have to be persistent and try to go to leadership, the director of programming, the director of residential, the president, the CEO, if you're not getting what you need. It's not jumping over somebody. It's just sometimes those intake staff are reluctant to go talk to people that are above them. It's not their boss. It's people well above their boss. That they're going to. So people can be scared of that in a larger organization that are staff members. So. I think you have to open your minds to the possibility, because when we were talking about safety earlier, in the illusion of safety, the reality is that we all want hands-on 24-hour care for our children whenever they're growing up and moving out. And I have a child without a disability, and I still wanted that, right? Because I didn't want anything to happen to him. But, the reality is that it's not feasible sometimes for all people, or you have to fight for the amount of support that will work, and like Amy said, they're still not to 100% of support, but, we're almost there, and hopefully keep hiring.
And I think what is really neat, part of the backstory that I didn't share before was several years ago, I started really working at creating a relationship for Brandon with another friend of his. And I started to think, well, what is going to happen with him when he turns 22 and he's, eventually living on his own? Is he going to just be with this whole group of people that he doesn't know, he has nothing in common with? Maybe, they have sensory issues that don't line up, that don't match up. He's going to be miserable wherever he's at. I mean, the worst case scenario is living with people that you just don't get along with or you're not keen on. But what would be better than living with your best friend? So I really, really worked intentionally at creating a relationship for him with this other individual where they both seemed receptive to this relationship. So this mother and I just really worked at having the boys get together a lot, getting a lot of activities together, forming their community together, whether it be activities through church or special rec or Angelman syndrome walks or fundraisers. We went to the movies with the boys, the same restaurants, but they really became good friends. And I think it was just really neat the way it worked out, because his name was also drawn off the PUNS list about the same, within 2 years of the same time period. And when we were able to come in and talk with AID, I think part of their trepidation was, oh my gosh, where are we going to put this kid where on paper he is violent, he is aggressive, he has sensory issues. Who on earth is he going to get along with? And so when we came in, we were able to say, here's who he's going to get along with, because he already does. And so in a way, part of their job was done, because we were able to put together a house of individuals that we knew was going to work well together. There wasn't going to be that gamble or safety of, are the kids going to be safe together? Are they going to work well together? Is this going to mesh? And so I think in a way they were grateful for that. it worked out in both of
Yeah.
our favors.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that I wouldn't have even thought of, but is totally true, because you would be concerned about, putting people together, trying to match make people that could be potential roommates, when one could potentially harm the other if you don't, if they haven't made that connection. Mary,
I just have a
what?
quick question, and if it's too much in the weeds, just ignore it.
Okay.
So does your son's friend rent from you since you own the house?
Yeah, the way that we work it out is that each individual that lives in the home pays their own rent. So they pay,
As the owner?
well, they actually pay the rent to AID, and then AID sends a rent check to me for the whole amount every month.
Right,
So-
one other quick question.
It's, wait a minute, so I just want to make sure that it's SILA funding, so we're using the rate that they receive from their SILA, so they don't have, they have a housing agreement, but they are not retaining their own income and paying the rent. It's the SILA rate that is received that is part of their income. It comes right to AID, and then we pay the rent to the landlord.
And when you negotiated with DHS, were you negotiating for intermittent SILA hours?
No, we were, it's always been a 24-hour SILA because of the needs of the folks that are being served there. We were negotiating for additional one-on-one supports and more people that would be able to be in the home because of the intensive sensory and potential aggression and other issues, right? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Is the rent enough to cover the house, or is it, are you like also supporting it?
I mean, it does make things tight, but like Lori said, you have to be open to fundraisers. And I mean, in my position, I really feel like I didn't have another choice. Like, I couldn't manage this anymore on my own. And, with a little bit lighter load, then I can do the fundraising that I need to do to make the rest of that work and piece together. And,
Right.
And
I think part of the challenge is that it's a two-person home at the moment, so there's only two people paying into the rent, which keeps it tight, because you only get so much money in your SILA rate sheet if you have it for room and board. And there are costs associated with running a SILA for the provider, like being able to, have food and electricity and water and internet and all those things, that are also in that SILA rate sheet. I always do this because it's in the upper right-hand corner of the SILA rate sheet. So this to me means anyway. So it's, I think that makes it a little bit harder. Hopefully when and if we add in, a third person and or your younger son that will eventually potentially age out and move in, then that might help a little bit too with the rent.
well, and
portion.
we did, in piecing of the house together, I was able to work with other parents who also are on board with fundraising and having the money that it takes to keep everything running. But, I mean, they do provide what you need. It's just,
Yeah,
Has to
part
be
of the
your own.
cost too, just from an initial startup, was that you're putting together staff and training, and the work on the home and going over there to meet whenever they haven't moved in yet, so you're not getting any money for it yet, right? So that initial startup cost, if you will, which is above and beyond putting in furniture and all those things that you actually do get some funding for in the SILA model. You get some startup money, but it's something like $3,000 for like furniture and that. We sent people to, Angelman training and conference, states away, and, invested in, the planning, the gradual visits and all that stuff, not really receiving any funding to do that, if that makes any sense to you.
And as a homeowner too, you have to have a certain amount that you're setting aside for, a roof or a furnace or anything else that's gonna go wrong with appliances and, so that being said, you just hope you're building up enough you gotta make that work. So,
In the front row?
yeah.
Could you just do a brief funding 101? You have home-based waivers, you have SILA money, you have all this money. If your loved one is in a day program, where's the SILA money coming from? I mean, how's all this money work?
So SILA funding includes funding for your day services when you move to SILA funding from home-based funding. So I'm not the funding expert, but there are like two major buckets in the Division of Developmental Disability. Home-based services that are capped at a 2.5 times Social Security amount of money. I don't know what it is right now, $28,000, something like that. So,
It's $2,350 a month.
okay, so somewhere around,
49.
yeah. So, and with that home-based money, the person is generally living in the family home, and you are able to purchase services with that set amount of money. So you can't spend any more money than that. So you could choose what services you want. You could say, I want special rec services. I'm going to go to special rec and pay for a support person to go assist my child in doing that. But once you get to the end of that money, you don't have, it's not going to pay for 24-hour care, right? Because it's not enough money.
It's the same bucket though. So if you have, for example, your adult loved one in the day program, and you've been waiting on a SILA, that money, SILA money still has to come out of that same bucket.
SILA money, when you get selected, so you got home base and SILA. If you're using your home base now to pay for your day programming, you would have to change to SILA funding, and you'll get different messages about how readily available that is to happen. Legally, it is supposed to be able to happen. If you're already receiving Medicaid services, which home-based services are, then you should be able to switch to a higher level of service. But it's not super clear. And we don't have great guidance from the Division of Developmental Disability about how to make that transition. So a lot of people are still on the PUNS list that are receiving home-based services and might be selected for SILA services. And then when you are pre-selected or selected for SILA services, that's when you begin to look for potential placement or locations and providers. And those SILA services have funding for transportation and for day programs and for 24-hour care and for food and electricity and internet and nursing and behavioral health and all these things in it, right? And so that all is kind of encompassed by the word SILA. So it's confusing because they call the service package SILA, Community Integrated Living Arrangement, and they call the actual property or building that is what we would all call a group home, group living, group of people that are sharing a home. They call that actual building a SILA too. So it gets really kind of confusing. But if you're selected for SILA services, it will have a package of service funding within it that includes your day programming, etc. Does that make sense? Okay. I don't know who
So
is-
like when you're starting out with the home-based waiver, that fund is, that when the funds run out, you're still responsible for caring for your child. And the
Right.
home-based waiver is kind of like a Band-Aid
Right.
to get you through the day, because your child is coming back every evening.
Right.
Eventually, you'll get to the point where through the state, you will get your residential funding or your SILA funding through the PUNS list.
Do you
So-
have to apply for it, especially, I go to Clifford and say, I want to apply for SILA funding, even though I have this home-based waiver.
You have to make sure through the Illinois provider, which is Illinois Service, Inc., that your name is on the list through the state.
So
for-
you might have a different ISC. So CIU.
Oh,
Okay.
CIU.
So
Okay.
so the Independent Service Coordination Entity is the entity responsible for putting you on the PUNS waiting list, for doing those updates that Amy talked about, the updates to the list every year where she felt like she didn't get anything. She just was like, hey, and they just said, okay, you're still on the list.
Right.
So the ISC does that. They're also who you could talk to about if you already have home-based services and are receiving that funding, about the desire and need to go to a higher level of service, so SILA service. So you can talk to them about that. I don't know what they will say, because again, the Division of Developmental Disabilities hasn't put out good support for how to do that, how to ask for that. But at the minimum, you want them, if you're interested in residential, if you're interested in somewhere for your child to live outside of your home, you need to get them on the PUNS list for SILA services. Kish, I don't know.
I just want to make sure I have the family tree here. Brandon and Billy live in your home, your rental home? Okay, and then your younger son lives, how old is your younger son?
He will be 18 next month, so he's still living at home, and the next step to the process is figuring out where we can place him and how we can figure out how to recreate the wheel for him.
So when you had this home, when you were making it into a SILA, what was the process like to get it approved? Or like we learned at a conference yesterday, we're putting a lot of focus on exit signs and not, the supports and whatnot that it takes, or the people that are in the house. So how easy was it to get that approved? I've heard that.
It was, it's because it's a two-person non-agency controlled, we don't own it. A landlord owns it. You don't have to go through all of the licensing requirements. So I don't think there was a lot of stuff you had to do.
Yeah, there was, because if there's 3 people or under as well, you don't need to have meet the same requirements through the state for like,
Sprinkler.
the sprinkler system in the ceiling and different weighted doors and all that business. So we didn't have to deal with any of that. So it was more just the case of making sure, like, I put in the hardwood floors or laminate just to make sure we didn't have constant messes to clean up after, and
Right.
I don't know, just little things too in the home that.
So that's
would
one of
make
the
it
other joys
livable.
of this, because it's not agency controlled and because it's small, there are, less hoops to jump through, which makes it more home-like, I think, because you don't have to have, I don't know about you guys, but I have sprinklers in my house, but I was going to show you all some more pictures. Bedroom and backyard.
How many bedrooms are there?
There's 3 bedrooms.
Yeah, is there a person there 24/7 with them?
The model that we had set up is where they have a changeover of staff every 8 hours. So no one lives there,
And part of that is because of the intensity of the service and the need to be
They
kind
need a
of
wait staff.
prepared and, on your
Yeah.
toes and, aware of everything that is going on around them.
So that person there's nobody sleeping there then, they're awake?
That's some of the staff, right?
It's a wake staff, because the boys have a sleeping disorder, so they don't sleep during the night. So everybody just felt like it was the best case scenario just to have constant 8-hour shifts of people.
And these are staff members with Brandon, right?
Yeah, yeah, so that's his day staff is Samantha, and then Steven works a lot of evenings, and this is Alex with his day program. So they get along pretty good.
Deal with multi-unit buildings?
Do what now? Say that again.
Multi-unit.
Multi-unit buildings, so not just homes.
Yeah.
Do you work with them?
Ooh, multi-unit.
Multi-unit
buildings.
buildings. do you-
Yeah, that's what I said whenever
So,
we had,
yeah, have you ever discovered co-op housing, and if not, why not?
We have not
Repeat
used.
the question, they didn't hear.
So he's asking about if we use co-op housing, and frankly, I'll tell you, I don't know anything about co-op housing. My background is support housing and multifamily affordable housing, and so we use a lot of units that are affordable there. I think we're open to anything. I mean, we've done stuff in a variety of locations, so we will. We will call you, but no. So we have not personally at AID.
I made a couple of suggestions suggestions of possible speakers on some of these topics, and I'll just mention two of them. Around the country, there's a pretty big movement for backyard homes, like you said, granny flats, right? So the city of Chicago, you know, and in most cases they're not legal, but they're starting to become legal. And Evanston is one of the first communities around here that is allowing in residential districts the building of small houses in the backyard. And many of the calls, the name of it is called the Evanston Development Co-op, if you want to look them up. It's info@evanston.coop. They're getting a lot of calls from families who have children with disabilities with the idea that the parents are going to build either an addition or something separate and then create this kind of shared arrangement that you know, so beautifully done. And I think there are a lot of family groups that are out there now trying to figure out something. So one of the things that's been so frustrating to me is that I have in my own community, we're going down this road now, affordable housing. We have families, you know, the development director said lots of people are coming and telling you they have a kid with a disability and they don't know what's going to happen. So, you know, I think a lot of communities are thinking about these things, but I know for a fact that there are houses in our community that are very quirky, unusual houses that could accommodate, you know, 4, 5, 6, you know, nice layout, and there's no way to connect these families. You know, maybe they have a couple of friends or 2 siblings and a friend.
Yeah.
And so
The only people that I know that do marriages like that or work with groups that actually probably are already kind of together is Avenues to Independence in Evanston, which usually will do, that does some support of groups to have families come together and say, you know, we 5 families, we 12 families, we whatever are interested in an apartment building or whatever, and figure out ways to look at all their connections and be able to make something happen, but they can't do it for free, so people have to, you know, purchase some of that support.
Yeah, Center for Independent Futures.
That's it, that's right, sorry, I said the wrong name. Sorry.
Along those lines, you were talking about your silos in an apartment building, that you were able to get some apartment units and set up these silos. Now, do those landlords just accept your silo funding as rent?
So it depends upon how the SILA is set up. So we get people on the statewide referral network and Section 811 waiting lists, as well as Public Housing Authority waiting lists. And if they get the rent that they ask for, right? You know, and so whatever is so they could be accessing a rental subsidy that allows them to pay a lesser amount, you know, right? And the subsidy pays the difference, or most of the homes, so sometimes we have people that retain their own income, and we just help with budgetary things, and they pay 30% of the rent, and the rental subsidy pays the difference to the landlord. You know, the landlord's not aware of, you know, like their financial, like whether it's SILA, they don't care how they're getting paid the rent. And there are affordable housing developments, which is why we work with affordable housing developments, because their rents are reduced because they're affordable, so.
Not all of them have vouchers, right?
Not all of them have vouchers, but they all have affordable rents. So if you want me to get into affordable housing 101, it's super complicated, but we can have a discussion. Yeah, we have a discussion about it, but mostly affordable. So and affordable is a relative term, right? So in basic affordable housing development, there's one major program across the country that's called Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. It's an IRS program that gives tax credits to housing finance agencies in every state. In Illinois, it's the Illinois Housing Development Authority, or IDA. Those tax credits come to the Illinois Housing Development Authority. They put out an application, and affordable housing developers submit an application to be able to apply for those funds. If they receive the award, they sell the tax credits, and that's where they get the money to build the property. Because they are able to get that money in that way, they can have lower rents and are required to have lower rents than a traditional, non-affordable housing developer, just a housing developer that's doing it to, fair market rent or higher, right? Luxury apartments, other things. Those rents can be a couple of levels. So there can be 50% of area median income rent, 60% of area median income rent, and almost every award from IDA anymore is required to have statewide referral network units in it, and those are at 30% of area median income rent. Those are flat rents for the size of the unit in the community area where it is, that are supposed to be affordable to 30% AMI, 50% AMI, 60% AMI persons. As you know, 30% of area median income rent is not where most people with disabilities are at. If you get just a flat Social Security disability, you're somewhere between 16 and 19% of area median income, depending upon where you live. That's where rental subsidies, and oftentimes these affordable housing developers seek to bring in rental subsidies that can go on these statewide referral network units to make them even more affordable for very low income persons. Because a 30% AMI rent is going to be a stretch for somebody who's making 17% of area median income. So that's the two different kinds of affordability. There's affordability of the building and the property, right, which still requires a lower rent. And then there's the a rental subsidy that can be used. There are several different types, but there are rental subsidies that a person has to be income eligible for. You have to be income eligible for these too, but is more based on a sliding scale of what somebody can pay based on their specific income. Does that make?
No, I
Okay.
understand it. But so when you have a SILA there, I guess I'm just trying to figure out how does that SILA fit into that affordable housing? That's what I was mentioning about.
So they just pay rent, so we either pay it out of the SILA rate, or if a person had, we have.
You have different.
Yeah, it just depends upon if the person is retaining their own income and is paying their bills, and we're just helping with management, then the person would pay their portion, and we would assist them in doing that to the landlord. The rental subsidy would pay the difference. If we're paying out of the SILA rate for room and board, we're going to pay the rent to the landlord out of everybody's rate that lives in the property. It's based on the SILA rate sheet. So we are going to take the example where we have 8 persons that are living in 4 units in a larger affordable housing apartment building. They have maybe a 50% area median income rent or a 30% area median income rent, because some people with a developmental disability are able to draw on their parents' Social Security and have a higher Social Security rate, so it can be above 30% sometimes. We're going to sign the lease, and we're going to pay whatever that 50% or 30% rent is from their rate or from the person's income if they retain their own income.
Okay, so if it's okay for just a second. I want to just circle, housing is, we could talk for 20 hours, 20 days, 20 meetings about housing. I just want to circle back a little bit to what the core of this presentation is, and that is separating provider servicing, providing the services within the home, whether it's 24/7 or intermittent or whatever it looks like, and family somehow owning a property, or could be renting, or whatever, separate where the provider does not own that property. So if we can circle back a little bit to that, I just want to make sure people who came, because that was the topic, get those questions answered, and if we exhaust that topic, we can certainly move on to some other ones. But can I ask a question about SILA in general? My concern with SILA is that because finances of our state, we are not providing adequate pay for people providing services in SILAs. It makes it hard to attract good people, it makes it hard to retain good people. Is there anything about this model that gives you more flexibility in terms of paying people more? Or could it be done outside of the SILA model using home-based in some way to pay people what they deserve to be paid?
I would say no, there's really not anything. I mean, and if we look at the shortage of staff people, that's across the board for any, and if there's like 300,000 jobs available, 150,000 people looking for jobs, we have a mismatch. We have continued aging of persons that need support, you know, yada, yada, yada. You guys are all aware of this. So there is not anything inherent within this model that allows us to pay more. I mean, we work on our pay scale. We pay more than what the state gives us in the first place. You know, and relatively speaking, you know, we have to figure out, you know, continued ways and, you know, to engage people and use technology and do lots of things that we don't do really well, I think, at this point in the state of Illinois to enhance and improve the delivery of service that may not be with people, but that can be with people even at a remote location sometimes or whatever. I mean, that's all stuff. And we actually just took a 4-person SILA, which was 4 people living in their own apartment. Each individual had their own apartment in an apartment building that we used to have 24-hour staff at. Those folks and their families believed they didn't need that extreme level of care. In fact, the staff slept overnight. They weren't required to be awake overnight. So we just took that down to an intermittent SILA for each individual and are using Night Owl remote support for overnight support and have people close enough. You know, we have to be able to respond within 15 minutes to the location in case something happens, but you're able to speak. We will, you know, I'm saying never, I'll knock on wood, we will never personally at AID, as long as I'm there, have cameras in the home because I believe that's an invasion of people's privacy and it's not normal. But we will have remote supports all day long if we can to help support people, even if it's just a higher level of support when staff are there too, with the idea of having sensors, doors, windows, the ability to speak to someone if something happens at a strange, you know, if at 11:30 a window opens that normally wouldn't be open, you know, we can say, hey, Bill, what's up? You know, is everything okay? Do you need anything? You know, and you can get, they can talk back and forth. And I think we'll see how this goes. But, you know, I think we have to get to this level of using technology to its highest level in order to then shift money to the folks that really need you know, a higher level of personal care. But this model does not inherently give you anything. It just is more normal, if you will. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I had roommates for a long time. When I got divorced and was a single mom, I had another single mom and her daughter as a roommate along with me and my son because we couldn't afford, you know, to live on our own. So, I mean, I think this is not, you know, untoward, and having people, you know, in a variety of apartments within a larger complex is, you know, has proven to be pretty good for many of the people that we serve, whether there's 24-hour staff there or whether there's, you know, intermittent staff there. I don't know who's first, but yes.
Okay, so you have this relatively small situation, a few number of residents. You ever run into issues with the village where you can't have more than 3 unrelated people living together without a zoning variation kind of thing? I don't know if you could speak to that or as an agency. And is it vary among different villages? How do you get around that?
Well, I think when I did buy the house, I made sure that it was zoned, like we were able to rent the home out. And beyond that, there were no requirements or nothing with the city.
That's like a different thing. That's like the village saying you can't have more than X number of unrelated adults living in a residence.
Right. No, we
But
didn't.
Yeah, but that's about rent, but that's about rental policy that different townships, villages, cities, counties, depending upon where you're at, have. We have not had huge problems with any of that. And if you're thinking about an apartment building, that's certainly never gonna, I mean, like that apartment building is zoned so that different people can live in it. But we have 40, we have 40 SILAs, some of them being, like I talked about, but a lot of them being traditional single-family homes that have anywhere from 4 to 8 people. All of our homes, everyone has their own bedroom. So, because we feel at the minimum that is the best way to deliver service and to have a more normative experience. Because even when I did have a roommate, I didn't have to share a bedroom with them. So some of them are.
Different model than what we're talking about.
But she's one of our. Yeah, she's one of. So we have 40 SILAs. Her home is one of them.
I understand, but I'm just trying to distinguish, AID also owns our own properties from
Yeah.
days gone by.
Uh-huh.
And then this is a different
Right,
model.
but what I'm saying is that with those properties, we have the same thing you're talking about, 3 persons, 5 persons, however many unrelated living together. I mean, we haven't had a huge issue with that. I think it depends upon the township. Everyone has their own policy. I would push back against, and I can get you in touch with fair housing people that I would sue those jurisdictions that try to do that. If the city of Springfield right now lost a lawsuit trying to keep SILAs a certain amount of feet away from each other in the community. So I think that, some of those discriminatory practices that maybe weren't intentionally set up to discriminate against people with disabilities but have become de facto ways to do that, have been getting pushed back and some changes being made.
Well, and I'm sure, like,
First, right? There's
Yeah.
there's going to be so many
Right.
people that need this.
Right.
Quick question, Lori? I guess you have a quick one? Oh, someone else.
Well, yeah, I just have a couple of questions. Intermittent SILA, do you only go 24/7 to 15? I mean, why not a little bit more gradual, like a 25-hour deal?
We will deliver whatever service a person needs that we get approved for. The issue is that the division doesn't approve readily more than 15 hours for intermittent SILA. There was a informational bulletin that has been out for probably 5+ years now, because it came out when I was at the state, because people thought that intermittent SILA was a threshold of 15 hours, and the division came out and said it's a base of 15 hours and you can add more hours. But we don't find that readily approved by the division, and you have to fight through that. So we do have a handful of people that are receiving intermittent SILA. They get 20 hours a week, and I do know of other locations where across the state where people have gotten significantly more hours, 50, 60 hours a week, but basically you have to really work with your ISC, your provider agency, and kind of really push through at this point, because there's not a real standard practice for how that works. The other issue with that is that if we continue with that model of paying by the hour, it'll very quickly get too expensive. So we have to figure out, and we've been pushing on the provider side for us to figure out and propose to the state a way to deliver less than 24-hour a day service with some kind of rate, whether it's like a graduate, whether it's 0 to or 1 to 15 hours, this much money, 16 to, and have some kind of tiered process, I think is what we'll probably get to, but we're trying to work on putting that together and proposing it to the state as a way to try to ensure that people get their own, because we don't want a handful of people to be able to end up being in less than 24-hour, but more than 15-hour, and then no one else have the opportunity to move out at all, right? So.
And what happens, can you say what happens with they're employed and they have wages when they take a SILA placement or an intermittent SILA? What happens with their wages?
So it depends upon the type of placement that they get, but they get the first, I don't know, it's really a disincentive, and that's another thing we're trying to work on, encouraging the state. And you get the first $50 without any, and then you get dollar for dollar, you know, every dollar that you make, we get $1 supposedly.
So you're turning over your wages.
Basically, most people. So they're paying. So this is another thing that I think is totally, you know, unfair and possibly illegal, but nobody's done anything about it. But is the idea that we get all of your Social Security except for $60, and then we're going to take all your wage. I mean, like. We're requiring people to almost pay 100% of their wages for their housing. So this is not my rules. I just want to be clear about that. These are state rules, you know. And there are places that have chosen not to take any of the wages. We try not to dun people, but the state gives you less money when the person is working. So then we can't make it break even, you know, without having them give. So they pull back how much, they keep more of the Social Security themselves at the state level somewhere. I don't know where it goes, you know, but if the person is working, because we're supposed to take some of those, you know, they're paying their own portion, if you will. But to me, I mean, 50%, I mean, 50% of your income is ridiculous, but.
So your intermittent solar package does include rent, and what you were saying is in a home anyway, a solar home anyway, which is food, electricity, et cetera, and then just a lower amount of services and no day program. So I'm just confirming.
Yeah.
Figure out what's.
Yeah, so intermittent SILA, you know, is a lot less service, you know, than 24-hour SILA is. So we, you know, do ours based on, we do have people in intermittent SILA that come and participate in day programming or work. A lot of people work that use our intermittent SILA program. We have somewhere between 48 and 52 people that are in intermittent SILA, and our SILA staff kind of, you know, rotates through. They have different times that they might have scheduled with them. They might need more assistance at dinner time, or they might need assistance going to the doctor's office, whatever those pieces are. And we do have people that participate in other programming from there, especially they can get DRS, you know, employment services, you know, but that is always, that's a challenge too in the way that we have the system set up. So if you had more of a tiered funding level, you know, you could maybe offer some more daytime activities if people aren't engaged in something else that doesn't cost money to participate in, right?
But they do get, but the agents, or through their package, solar package, they do get food, a home to live in.
For 24-hour SILA, yeah. So in,
Not for this, I'm saying for intermittent, you don't.
So intermittent SILA, the way we generally run it is not the same as a 24-hour SILA. So we generally, unless the person really can't at all, we have the person retain their own income. We help them, you know, as a service, pay their bills and budget and buy the things that they need, but we're not getting the same types of rate to take care of their 24-hour care because we're not responsible for their 24-hour care, even though if something happened to them in those 24 hours, we would be in trouble. Even though we don't get the funding to, you know, have peepers on them for 24 hours a day, so. Does that make sense? Okay.
I was wondering what you might say
I can't hear.
to families, their kids get along, they're around 20, the parents are open to maybe, you know, buying property for the boys, and they have Social Security, they have Medicaid, they can hold down a little job, they can't drive. I'm just curious what.
But they haven't been selected for service yet?
No,
Okay.
they have lots of courses, they got all those others.
Right.
You know, do those families with little open mind house, what things you might do to explore that?
So I think, I'm not a financial expert, but I think that personally I would be reticent to purchase a home without services that would allow my loved ones to be able to live in that home, unless I have plans to rent it to other people in the meantime, and without partnering with a service provider that could potentially deliver the service. Just because.
How would be long term? What's higher there is the community, getting some kind of support like this.
I mean, that's what I would personally do, just because that's what I personally would do. Again, I am not a financial advisor, so don't take my advice, unless you choose to.
And Amy, I wasn't necessarily looking at
Yeah.
financial, I'm open to all suggestions, just walking it out.
Yeah. I mean, that.
Provider first and then buy the house, or do you?
I mean, I would be nervous because I wouldn't think that not every provider is going to say yes, right? You know what I mean? So what if you buy a house in Addison and there's no provider that serves Addison that will do what you say, then what do you do, right? You know, I mean, like if you can rent the home or if you can resell it, if you're going to retire there, whatever, there's some other plan for it, you'd be potentially all right. But personally, myself as a parent, and when I'm thinking about it, I probably would not invest in a home. I mean, Amy's plan was she was renting a home, so that hopefully at some point, it would work out. Okay, that's going to pay for your expenses of at least the home while you're going on as you become a landlord, right? But I'm not sure that I would personally, as a parent, in the environment that we're in today, really just go buy something somewhere and then try to make everything work. I think I'd start trying to talk to people about trying to make something work and then think about purchasing. I don't know. Amy, what do you think?
No, I agree. I think it is a really risky process because, like we had so many meetings, but, it was several months before, like, I think we agreed that this was the model we wanted to go with in like March or April. And I didn't have a lease with them until November. So we went all that time where you're going to have to float that cost on your own. And then you're talking about all your ifs too of whether or not you're going to get that funding through the state anyway, the PUNS funding. But I think if I had to, with my other son, what I'm thinking is, which I don't know, we've got like a number of different scenarios, but, honestly, I wouldn't be opposed to, having the home that I'm in now, become that home for my other son, and I move out, just kind of like what we've been talking about with the mother-in-law type thing. So you have a home. So, I mean, maybe in your situation, you purchase a home that you feel like would be suitable for your child for life or their friends, and you're actually using that as your residence until you get the funding and everybody's packets and everything are in order, and then you're the ones that move out and the kids move in.
So I'm going to go. Mary, I'm going to skip over you because I can answer your question anytime. These other people can't.
I would like to speak to the current question from just an experience we had this week. We were contemplating taking a condo, putting our son there. With his Social Security, it would cover the expenses. With his home-based services, it could cover staffing to a point. We talked to our agency here in the neighborhood and asked if they would be willing at some point on our death to take it over. And we were told flat no. So basically, their take was they need to go through the whole process themselves up front. They need to get approved, our son, that they would take him regardless of us. They needed to really have it from the ground floor, but they would not agree to take over, even though they've been our agency for years that we were paying. They would not agree to take over something in the future.
For me, in the guardians that I've chosen and then the will that I've created, the home will still keep running and functioning exactly the way it is. If I die this afternoon or tomorrow or 50 years from now or whatever the case may be, it's not going to skip a beat because I have people in place that are in charge of those finances and the funding and manage it.
But as far as an agency to do staffing, they were not interested.
Bob and Lori, could you speak to the reason why they said no?
Yes. They said that because his behaviors occasionally are a little aggressive, that they have not been offering him places in their SILAs, and they were not going to, they would feel the same way in the future.
Well, and if he lives independently in an apartment building, or a condo building that by himself, that's essentially a one-person SILA if you go to a higher rate of service, right? Using home-based, and there are about probably 400 or less one-person SILAs across the state of Illinois that have been approved and funded by the state of Illinois. So they're probably just trying to guess, you know, what else was their challenge,
It
you
wasn't
know.
a matter of money.
Yeah, no, right.
It was
Right.
staff.
Right. Well, I mean, and it is the ability to pay for the stuff and have approval of the stuff and find the stuff, right? You know, so it's kind of like a twofold, it is money in some terms because it's money from the state eventually for approval to support somebody, right? You know, I mean, like if he needs more than home base. Yeah.
There would be no cost to them for the real estate.
Right, for the real estate, but it would require the state to approve the staff and the funding for the staff to be able to deliver the service there. So I'm assuming that like as you age, right, and you guys are out of the picture and then your child ages, then their service needs might increase to be more than the home-based SILA would pay, you know, HBS would pay for, right? And so then how do they get approved a one-person SILA when the person's been living there with home-based service? You know, see what I'm saying? I mean, it's like catch-22 on the state level in terms of how do you flip to make that work. I mean, one of the things that is working about Amy's is that it's, you know, 2 or 3 people, depending upon if the third person joins the home in the third bedroom or not. That means we've got funding for staff for 3 people. So we're able to support all them, but getting the state to approve a one-person SILA, if it ever needs to come to that, is really hard, and they can't probably couldn't bank on that ahead of time. I'm just speaking for what we would think about when we looked at it, so that it essentially is about money because it's about will you be able to have the money to support the needs of the person that is there. Will you have the money approved from the state to purchase the staff? And will you be able to find the staff to work with a person that might have higher support needs or have some challenges that not your typical 19-year-old DSP is going to be able to.
And I mean,
support.
in preparation for that, is that something you would recommend, like the SST get involved with, so that?
I mean, I think
He would require a bunch less staff.
Yeah.
What is SST?
I mean, SST is
Support Services Team.
it's a team that works with folks that are having some high behavioral needs that are not being successful in their setting that's supposed to come in and help you as a provider or support, you know, do a plan, support that person, et cetera.
Just getting back to the separating of the housing, supports your supportive housing. What's your supportive housing model look like?
What sources of supportive housing?
Yeah,
So the SRN and A11 units, if you don't have your ISC agency having your loved one on the SRN and A11 waiting list, you're missing the opportunity for a unit that would be potentially a supportive housing unit.
And then it's still a couple of days for your supportive.
It could do either. So like this, we do hear of people that are able to have enough supports through home-based services to be able to maintain they're in the community in their own home. And then we hear of people that have intermittent SILA hours. You know, I mean, just it's based on the needs of your loved one and how much support and how much they're going to be able to do. And oftentimes, parents are really. I always think it's really cool because parents are often really surprised at the level of skill that your child has, because I'm 53 years old and my mother will still cut my meat for me if I ask her to. And so we all do the same thing, right, in our home, and so it's easier to go ahead and do the laundry than to fight with, you know, my son to get him to do the laundry, right? You know, so, but when you move into your own home, wow, I get to make choices, I get to clean, I get to do these things, and people are really usually excited about that and do much more, have much more skill than their family really even recognizes. One of the things that we did when I was at the state was in a larger apartment complex that was affordable, that a group of young people that had grown up together and they were now in their late 20s and early 30s began to be selected off the waiting list. They didn't want home-based services because They wanted a more independent lifestyle. They didn't want traditional 24-hour Scylla because they wanted a more independent lifestyle, and they had lives that were built up in volunteer experiences and employment and all those things, and they didn't want to give that up for, you know, less choice in a 24-hour Scylla. So they waited and waited, and they worked, and they talked to providers, and they interviewed providers. They did this for like 2 years. One provider kept talking to them, and I had just started at the state, and I went to a open house where they just lambasted me, you know, for housing is not a real option for, you know, people. Whenever I started as a statewide housing coordinator, they started talking about this property that would be really cool, that was under construction, that would be really great for them. And I knew that that property, once they started talking about it, had statewide referral network units in it. So we said, you know, let's see what we can make work here. Those folks have been there for 4 years now. All of them are still there. There are people that have 50, 60 hours a week. There are people that have 15 hours a week because they have a mix of needs. They're able to share some of their service because they have been best friends for like since they were like literally in school together, kindergarten. So if one person, you know, if they're going to go to the store, they don't need to have one staff person with each one of the 6 people that live there. Individually go with, you know what I mean? They can go on a, you know, we're going to go to the grocery store, we're going to go to Walgreens, we're going to go wherever. The majority of them work, work out. They watch the Blues on the big TV downstairs in the great room. You know, they watch baseball. They love all these things. They're all my friends on Facebook. I watch them, you know, all the time. One of the gentlemen just got a dog last year because he was always, he had a dog at home with his parents, and so he's been really excited. I see you. I'm going to come over there. You're going to have to keep your hand up. But, you know, these things are possible, but we had to pound through a lot of, you know, issues, and it was dead in the water like 50 times. I'm not kidding you. I can't tell you the amount of times that I was driving around pulling out my hair, starting to cry because I couldn't figure out how we were going to make this work just on the housing side. So it's not easy, but if you know, have a dream for something different, if your child has a dream to be like their peers and live in their community like all of us, I don't know about you guys, but when I was 30, I didn't want to be living with my mom. I did, actually, believe it or not, but but you know, it was not my dream, right? You know, I mean, like everybody wants to be independent, so we have to get to where we're comfortable, and they had to get to where they were comfortable with, you know, what their child did. And you know, there's a video about this place, and the, you know, one of the moms like was staying with her daughter overnight through the week. And then on the weekend, she would take her home to her you know, birth home. And then she was driving back one Sunday night, and her daughter said, "Mom, I'm okay." And she left her by herself and driving home crying, you know, because she was happy, but it was also really hard, right, and scary. But, you know, people said, "Oh, he can't use a knife. He's helping cook dinner." You know, I mean, like, it's always surprising. I'm going to go to this woman over here because she has had a hand up in the air.
I'm trying to put it down so it doesn't annoy you. I just didn't know where you were going with that, sorry. So could you tell me the difference between a one-to-one in-home Scylla, which is one of the options for someone who can't attend the day program, versus an intermittent Scylla? Are they one and the same?
No, they're not the same. So intermittent Scylla has usually about 15 hours on average of service per week to support the person in their own home. One-on-one is usually a staff that is working with only that person for whatever time frame it's scheduled. You know, so it might be during the daytime. So you could have a intermittent Scylla that has no add-on one-on-one hours, technically speaking, you know, but it would take a lot of like paperwork about this thing where everybody can go out and turn in and hopefully get approved at some point.
So it's different than what you said is the one-person Scylla, because that's when you pay for regular house service as well. So when you get your one-to-one, it's basically just kind of like almost based on this.
Yeah, right.
It's more personalized for learning and things like that versus.
And And it's generally given to people that, might need some more, eyeball, connection and support in more of a group setting. One-on-one usually is, if that makes sense, one-on-one thing.
Florence wanted to stay a few minutes, that's fine. I just want to make a couple points. First, based on the conversations, I will promise next year's Friday Forum schedule to do a forum on the statewide referral network and how A11 housing and all that kind of stuff works. It's kind of sort of separate, but not always separate from the topics we've been talking about today. But clearly there's a lot of interest, so I promise to do that. Second is, Lori is not typical of providers. And I want to make that clear. We were talking, Mary and I were talking back there. She's a trailblazer. What she does in her organization is incredible. And what we hope as families, and what I
Me, my staff.
well, everyone.
I don't do the work.
Under your leadership, however, because she's doing creative things that other people are not doing. And what I hope is, since we all don't live in her area and she's not going to be able to serve all of our kids, is that we learn from what she's doing, that you create a strong partnership with whatever provider you're interested in working in, and nudge them forward on trying something new with you. You have to be the great partner that Amy is to your provider. They're not going to do it for you, but take what you learn, the creative things that other people are doing, and try to mold them and lead the way. It's not going to be easy, I can guarantee you, but if you have a good relationship and they trust you and you're going to do your share of the work, you're that much further ahead, and maybe they'll try it with you. I mean, all you can do is try it. But I want to applaud you for what you've done, not only when you were in the state, but the work she's done on the state level and with AID is incredible, and I hope we can give her a round of applause.